Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast, presented by the Chargers Podcast Network. My name is Steven, and I am the host, and joining me is my guy, Tyler. Tyler, what's up, man? How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. First day of teaching and being paid for it. It was great. Great first day with my kids. And listen, anytime you can walk into work after a Chargers victory, you're feeling pretty good. Sure, it was just the preseason, but it feels good to walk into work after a Chargers victory on the weekend.
Yeah, it certainly made the weekend more fun for sure. Obviously, we both work in education. I'm at a year-round school, though. It was first day for you. My wife works in education. It was a first day back for her without kids. But so wishing all of my fellow educators some good vibes. Sending it all to you guys as you work towards a new school year. And I'm glad Tyler had a great first day as well.
Yeah, it was awesome. Vibes out to all the people working in education. You deserve all the good things that happened this year.
There we go. All right, so on today's show, we are going to dive into that preseason game. We've had some time to look at the data, look at the numbers, watch some film, and really be able to, kind of take a broader scope at really what happened on Saturday night in this Chargers preseason game, have some takes to fire away. We're also going to be doing a game ball segment every single week on this show. Again, there's an instant reaction aspect of the game ball that's really tradition. Obviously, CJ Okoye, great story, great moment, got it from the actual Chargers team. Tyler and I are kind of taking a step back this week and being able to, really analyze who performed well. I felt like in 2021, I always would say on our show, I would retroactively change it to Rashawn Slater. And so this year we're doing that. We're taking a step back and, we're choosing these guys after being able to watch some tape and look at the numbers. So we'll have that today as well to round out the show. Yeah. As always, before we get started, Tyler and I are fans of the show. We are not employees of the Chargers organization. And as such, some opinions that we express on this show and every single week on this show are not reflected of the Chargers organization. So we're very grateful for this platform and excited to dive back into this preseason game. We'll also have a little bit of a look ahead to next preseason games, some things that we're going to be looking for next week. So, Tyler, what's up, man? You ready to dive back into this one?
Let's do it, man. I love talking about wins.
It's definitely way more fun to talk about wins. When in preparation for this show, I was really kind of curious where we would start and who we wanted to highlight for their performances. And like I said, there's a lot of great performances that I think we could talk about. But I think it's only right that we talk about Easton Stick and what he was able to do on Saturday night. Because it was a performance that we have not really seen from any quarterback over the past few years in the preseason. And specifically, I think we can look at certain things and how we might translate it to Justin Herbert. So, Tyler, now that we have some time to reflect back of what Easton Stick was able to do on Saturday night, what stands out to you about what he was able to manage and perform and put out on tape from that performance against the Rams?
Yeah, he was the best quarterback on the field that night and would have had an even bigger game if Quentin Johnston caught that one football. Probably could have capped off a drive with a touchdown if Jamari Salyer didn't have that holding penalty. The box score, it's 109 yards or whatever it is. But it was a really, really solid performance. And we've really started to see him take these steps in training camp, then at the scrimmage. And there's always one penalty or something quite doesn't go right. And it wasn't perfect in the preseason game either, but you just saw him take so many steps forward in terms of managing an offense. The run game definitely helped, and we'll talk about that. But Easton Stick, I think the one thing in particular that he did that we're not used to seeing is when there was pressure, it wasn't just abandon everything and run. It wasn't just I'm taking the sack here, or I'm going to scramble and, I've lost 17 yards because I run backwards. Easton Stick's career in pressure to sack rate in the preseason has been 21%. It's not been great. When there's pressure, he goes down. Now, granted, there's been some rough moments, and that's sometimes on the offensive line. But someone like Justin Herbert, some of these great quarterbacks, what makes them great is a low pressure to sack percentage. And Easton Stick faced 5 of those pressures on Saturday night, and his pressure to sack rate was 0. And he threw 0 turnover-worthy plays. So there really was no negative play from Easton Stick in that game. And that's something that we really haven't seen. So avoiding taking the sack, not making, a boneheaded throw and, another interception. He really took care of himself and the football, and the offense just looked so much better for it. And it's so great to see some of these guys, whether it's Hightower, Doss, Stone Smart, etc. These guys in training camp, the scrimmage, and in the preseason, they get some. Well, Hightower was hurt, but generally they've been getting work and shining on offense now. And we're talking about so many different guys getting a roster spot because Easton Stick is putting it together. So I just overall, and you can get into other specifics, but he's just been playing so much better. And again, protecting the football, protecting himself, letting other guys work. It's been quite a drastic turnaround for Easton Stick.
Yeah, you mentioned just like the managing the game aspect was huge for him. And that's something that we've seen him take some little steps over the course of his career. Obviously, 2020, he didn't get to play in any preseason game because there were no preseason games. But if you just look at like how he's progressed throughout his career under pressure, like, in 2021, his pressure to sack percentage was 40, which that,
right.
That was the first time he had played in a year, right? So it's understandable. Last year in 2022, it was 13. We'll see where it ends at this preseason, but it's at 0 right now, obviously. So that's a really positive step forward. You mentioned the turnover-worthy plays, too. And so just like the game management aspect, I think he took such big strides in. And that alone would be like, awesome. This is great. Like, this is player development. This is a fantastic step for him. But we saw a very aggressive Easton Stick on Saturday night. And if you watched a great breakdown from Underdog Fantasy, from Josh Norris and Colt McCoy, they did a great breakdown on Kellen Moore and Justin Herbert and how things could kind of translate. And, they highlighted that Kellen Moore's philosophy is to aggressively take what the defense gives you. And I love that phrasing, and I love how they illustrated how Dak did it, how Justin has done it in the past. And we saw some glimpses of that with Easton Stick. And again, I highlighted, like that aspect of managing the game was great to see. His average depth of target on Saturday night was 8.9 yards. That was up over 2 yards higher than what we have previously seen from Easton Stick in the preseason. In 2021, his ADOT was 5.9. In 2022, it was 7.5. We're talking about a full 2 yards difference from what we've seen. An 8.9 ADOT is a fantastic rate. Again, we'll see how that changes throughout the rest of the preseason. But he was taking shots. He was, firing balls over the middle into these really tight windows. You mentioned that touchdown to Quentin Johnston. There was another pass that he threw to Donald Parham where he went, his first read to the right was Quentin Johnston. Quentin was in the open, and he came back over the middle on a third down and fired a missile over the middle to Donald Parham for a third down conversion. And we just hadn't really seen that kind of aggressive mentality from Easton Stick and that comfortability for him to say, hey, like I can fit this ball into that window and I'm going to trust my guy to go make it happen. And so I loved the way that, I watched this video to hear that phrase of aggressively taking what the defense gives you. And then Easton Stick went out and did it on Saturday night against the Rams. And it was just a fantastic performance by him all around.
Yeah, you can hear all the time, we're going to take more deep shots and we're going to do this. And then suddenly the defense punches you in the mouth and you go, never mind. Maybe not this week. We'll try it against some other inferior defense. Look, again, this wasn't like starters out there. Aaron Donald wasn't out there. But Easton Stick did take those shots. And I believe his big-time throw rate tripled from his career. I think he has 3 big-time throws in the preseason in 3 years with the Chargers. And then he added 2 just on Saturday. It looks different. And, you talked about Justin Herbert a bit earlier. Like, okay, how does this translate to him? Pretty comfortably, because all respect to Easton Stick, Justin Herbert is a completely different tier in terms of throwing it down the field. So it's great to see that. And yes, it is the preseason. It's vanilla. The defense isn't calling their greatest things, but neither is the offense. It's great to see that what we've been seeing in practice is going to, if they can, translate to NFL games and in the regular season. And if you pair that with also this rushing attack that was really darn good too, which we will definitely get into today, Things are very exciting. Kellen Moore has done quite a bit, and I got a lot of talk the talk all the time. So far, it's been nothing but walk the walk as soon as training camp hit.
Yeah, it's one thing to do it in practice, like you mentioned, where your quarterbacks are not getting hit. Of course they'll have some sacks and team drills and things like that, but you can still pull up and throw a deep shot to John Hightower, to Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnson, Mike Williams, all these guys when you are in practice. But it's another thing to see it come to fruition in a game like this. And I thought Easton Stick was very calculated in how he took these shots. There was not a ton of like pure design deep shots. We didn't see like a sprint roll out to the right and I'm just going to chuck it deep to Mike Williams, 50 yards down the field on the opposite hash. There wasn't any of those plays. It was all Stick, like reading the defense, taking shots, taking what the defense gave him. And I love the way that he played. We saw Keelan Doss have a really nice corner route, and Easton Stick was able to hold the safety with his eyes, and it was a 1-2 progression, and he took that shot to Keelan Doss. I thought that we said this on our own show, best performance of Easton Stick's career, and honestly, like, he looked like a completely different quarterback. And I think if you take anything from that, you can take that kind of energy and mindset that Easton Stick had and realize who he's watching do it every single day in practice, which is Justin Herbert. And the coaches that he's being around right now are pulling that out of him. And theoretically, they're doing that same thing to Justin Herbert. And I think we've seen that in practice thus far. So, there was obviously a lot of what ifs about Kellen Moore's passing attack. And I loved what I saw on Saturday night with Easton Stick at the controls.
Once again, we've now strung together, especially like you and I were talking to players or reading articles, talking to Eric Smith. It's all about asking players to do something that maybe they were never asked to do before. Maybe Easton Stick would have been awful at those deep throws. Maybe things wouldn't have been so great. But let's give it a shot. Let's see what he's got. Let's get our eyes up, push the ball downfield. And I would be really curious to see what wide receiver separation or nearest defender looks like in terms of analytics, because it felt like, yes, he was throwing down the field, but also felt like guys were open and by themselves with just one DB. It wasn't into a crowd. There weren't two other linebackers. It wasn't 5 feet from the line of scrimmage. It just felt different. So kudos to whoever it is, Kellen Moore, Brandon Staley overseeing everything, Doug Nussmeier, Justin Herbert, Easton Stick, whatever. Kudos to them for resurrecting another 2019 draft pick who I had written off. I say the same thing about Trey Pipkins last year. Wrote him off. Sorry, after 3 seasons and the way he looked in the preseason, it was like, okay, that's probably all we're getting. Some things don't work out. And Easton Stick, this is year 5. Not many guys get that long. But listen, they continue to have faith in him. And, in this Brandon Staley regime, guys are just developing way further. Sometimes maybe you could say even longer than they quote unquote deserved. Easton Stick is 5 years. That's a long time. But he did develop, and they've continued to have faith in him. They've had the right coaches. It's been awesome to watch. Again, Trey Pipkins last year. It's one game for Easton Stick, I know, but we've been to training camp practices. We've been to the scrimmage. We see, read Daniel Popper's reports from The Athletic. Like, it's just different with Easton Stick. We're 13, 14 minutes into our conversation. We're talking about Easton Stick's great performance. Like, this is really cool.
Yeah, and it just adds like a more entertaining aspect to the preseason, and
there's that, yeah.
the conservative nature of the offense in the past 2 years, like, it just made it harder to really evaluate guys. And now Easton Stick is being aggressive. He's taking shots to guys like Keelan Doss. We'll see what happens when John Hightower comes back in practice. Those two are fighting for a roster spot, and now you can really see what they can do because you have a quarterback taking chances like Easton Stick. So a ton of fun to watch and should be exciting to see the last 2 preseason games. All right, very on brand. I think we have to revisit the offensive line again because, again, we have the numbers, we have the film. This interior offensive line put out an awesome performance, and that's everybody. If you just look at the top 6 interior offensive line players who played against the Rams, obviously you're talking about Zion Johnson, Will Clapp, Jamari Sawyer, the 3 starters, and then Jordan McFadden, Brendan Hymas, and Zach Bailey. So those were your 6 who played the majority of the game. Those 6 players on Saturday night allowed 4 total pressures, according to PFF, One of those from Jamari Sawyer, I strongly disagree with. I'm just going to put that out there. It was off of a stunt, which to me was more just kind of a miscommunication between him and the right tackle. So really you're talking about 3 pressures from this interior offensive line. And you want to talk about like projecting to the future. Like you're going to have Zion, Corey Linsley, and Jamari Sawyer just be able to set such a nice pocket for Justin Herbert throughout the season. And that's a huge aspect of why Easton Stick felt comfortable back there to take those shots. But it wasn't just those 3, right? Like we saw Jordan McFadden come in. We saw Brendan Hymas come in at center, Zach Bailey at right guard. Those 3 players combined for 2 pressures. Like those 3 players who are going to be key depth pieces. Well, maybe not, but at least 2 of them will be key depth pieces going forward. And you want to see what those guys can do. And I was very, very encouraged from what that second unit did on Saturday night with Jordan McFadden, Brendan Hymas, and Zach Bailey. It was just a fantastic thing to watch. And we can talk about the run game too. But the 6 of them really set the tone in terms of pass protection in a way that we really had not seen in the previous years with those kind of players. So big kudos to them. I do want to talk about the run game, but what did you make of those 6 interior players on Saturday night?
Yeah, man, it was awesome to see, and we will talk about the run game because there's so much a part of that in the run game that they were obviously a part of, naturally as offensive linemen. But I'm just so happy watching Zion Johnson play left guard and play it really, really well. I don't know if you had any rankings or tiers of who you thought maybe performed better or worse or whatever, but it's just great to see Zion out there. I don't know. It's such a small sample size, but it just looked like there was a comfort level there, which was great to see. Jamari's flipping back to right guard, Zion back to left guard. Things just look great. And honestly, Will Clapp, I feel like it's sometimes the butt of jokes because of a couple of games or a couple of moments. He's the backup center. He's not Corey Linsley. There's few guys that are, in the same way that many guys are not Rashawn Slater. So any backup is just not going to be him. But Will Clapp, I thought, had a really, really solid game, has had a solid scrimmage, pretty decent training camp, as is like him getting into his second year with this team. I think he's doing really, really well. I will then now mention the run game because it's an extension of what we saw at the scrimmage where especially towards the very last third, they decided to just enforce their will and things just looked better. Herbert looked more calm. The offense could move. Was it, big 20-yard runs? No, but it was like they were getting room. They were pushing. They were fighting. And so to see that now in the preseason game was awesome. And what's really cool is that Kellen Moore is doing this with the exact same pieces that they were there last year. Basically, nothing has really changed. Some guys have flipped sides. Brendan Hymas is trying out center. But it's basically the same pieces. And it's so good, and I'll kind of spoil what I said on our Chargers podcast crossover. That'll drop Wednesday, so tomorrow when you're watching this. In 3 games in 2021 and 3 games in 2022, the Chargers rushed for 177 yards and 166 yards in 3 games in each of those years. In just the one Kellen Moore preseason game, their running backs rushed for 186 yards. Just the one game. And like you said, it wasn't just, Joshua Kelly came in and had, 100 yards and great. Of course, he's the number 2 running back, and then Isaiah Spiller had 80, and that's it. No, it continued throughout the rest of the game. Guys were continuing to be successful because even the third rotation came in and looked really, really good. Blocking, pass protection, like you said, obviously in the run as well. And just to see the Chargers in particular, the running up the middle is inefficient. Running up the middle is inefficient. It's more inefficient than running outside, obviously. But the Chargers still, Joshua Kelly still averaged over 8 yards per carry up the middle. Isaiah Spiller over 5 yards per carry up the middle. And that's because of these guys on the interior. So, we're seeing the Chargers invest in the interior offensive line pretty repeatedly in the Brandon Staley era, and it's paying off because their second rotation is really, really strong. And I think that Brandon Staley is a really smart guy and understands, even just watching Aaron Donald, the way things have progressed, defensive tackles are becoming just as valuable as edge rushers if you can rush the passer. So the counterpunch to that is not just getting Rashawn Slater, but it's getting Jamari, it's getting Zion, it's getting McFadden, getting Hymas, Corey Linsley, who they signed. It's continuing to invest in that interior because it's just as important to protect that as much as it is just the tackles. So good for the regime for the last 3 seasons for investing in these guys. It's paying off, and they have the right coordinator pushing the right buttons.
Yeah, I loved watching those first 2 drives and the way that they were calling those run games. There was a statistic mentioned on the Athletic Football Show that Austin Eckler was like the 4th most efficient running back on duo, which is an inside run, and the Chargers really like to do it out of 12 personnel, which is 2 tight ends. And that was what we saw a lot of on Saturday night. We saw a lot of duo. We saw a lot of inside zone. And we saw some trap plays featuring Zion specifically as a puller. There was one play that was nullified from a holding penalty, which there were 2 penalties that nullified like really explosive runs. Both unfortunately were runs that Isaiah Spiller carried the football. So poor guy got I think like at least 80 yards taken off of his total on Saturday night because of some holding penalties. But I just love the intentionality of getting these guys into situations where they feel comfortable. And Zion talked about it today. Isaiah Spiller talked about it on Chargers Weekly about how much everybody is really excited about running the ball and how the downhill approach is featuring these guys well. And you brought up Will Clapp, and I thought Will Clapp had an outstanding performance on Saturday night. And I know that there's a drop-off in terms of like pass protection plan and the ability to communicate when you go from Corey Lindsey to Will Clapp. Like that's just the nature of the business. But individually, I thought Will Clapp was really solid last year, and I think you should feel really comfortable about him being your backup center. I think he's a solid backup center, and I think he showed that on Saturday night. And the guy that I really want to highlight here is Zach Bailey, the right guard who came in for Jamari Sawyer. We've heard from Brandon Staley at press conferences. We heard from Brandon Nugent in his interview with Eric Smith that the Chargers are really high on Zach Bailey. And this is a guy who they claimed off of waivers from the Washington Commanders, where he had mostly played tackle. That's what he did last preseason. And so to hear how highly they viewed him as a potential guard coming into this preseason, I was kind of confused, honestly. I was like, okay, like he's mostly played tackle for you. Now you're switching in positions, and you really are thrilled with this guy. So just like I wanted to see what he looked like in a game, and we've heard some good things about practice, but it just looks different in a game, right? And so he comes out in his first preseason game at right guard. He only allows 1 pressure. And if you look at the rushing statistics, the Chargers went to the right side, which definitely features some Jamari, definitely features some Zion pulling, like I mentioned. But that was a lot of Zach Bailey. And so if you look at their rushes to the right side, they went 12 carries, 72 yards for an average of 6 yards per carry. And that's featuring Zach Bailey. That's what they did last year with Zion after Rashawn Slater went down, as they featured that right side more. And they looked at Zach Bailey and said, let's feature him. He's going to be the focal point of our rushing attack. And he rewarded them with some great blocks. Like I loved watching that unit perform, specifically with Will Clapp and Zach Bailey. And I thought Bailey was, outside of Easton Stick, I think Bailey was the best player on the offense on Saturday night.
Wow, okay. The best player outside of Easton Stick on offense. Listen, you love your offensive line.
Zion played 7 snaps. I will say. Zion played 7 snaps.
They were great. Yeah. No, I certainly didn't hone in on Zach Bailey, but I'll take your word for it. I'll have to go back and watch him.
Yeah. It's just really like you have a ton of confidence, and this was the first game for Jordan McFadden at guard as well. There were definitely some learning moments for him. I thought his penalty on Isaiah Spiller was just unfortunate timing, but he's switching positions. The timing's different. The communication is different, and I think you come away from that performance very, very encouraged. And you have this backup trio of interior offensive linemen that I feel really comfortable with. I think we highlighted the offensive tackle depth last week and our concerns there. I feel great about the interior offensive line depth, which is pretty crazy to say considering the team that we love watching and their history with backup interior offensive linemen. But all 3 of these guys I thought played really well. They've all had good camps, and I think that this group is going to really be the focal point of the rest of the preseason. I don't know how much more we're going to see Zion and Jamari play, but Jordan McFadden, Will Clapp, and Zach Bailey, I think you feel great about as a backup into your offensive line trio.
Do you feel any differently, I'm guessing better, about the chances of then Jamari being the other actual swing tackle? Like, we've sort of talked about it, but they haven't moved him. But the more you see from this offensive line to interior, like as you said, Zach Bailey was amazing. If you're seeing that, you're seeing McFadden develop, granted as a left guard, you're seeing this interior improve and look really good. Are you more like kind of stock up on the idea that Sawyer could actually be that sort of swing tackle, or?
I mean, I would love to, like, if he's your swing tackle, I think you feel great about that. But I think that they would still kind of prefer to keep him there and maybe bring in somebody else at tackle before you move him. Like, if there's 2 injuries at offensive tackle, then I think you put Jamari back out there. But the double-edged sword here is like, yes, Jamari's proven that he can be a quality offensive tackle, but it's like, ideally you want him to find a long-term home, and I think that his best position is at right guard, and so ideally it doesn't come to that point, and Jamari gets to stick at right guard. Obviously you don't want any injuries, right? But for Jamari's sake, I think his long-term best position is at right guard, and hopefully he's able to stick it out there.
Not to be this guy, but you did focus on the offensive line, and we've sort of left out a name here. So I am a little curious how you felt Foster Sarell fared in his sort of debut, I guess, of the preseason.
It did not live up to what I was hoping for. Foster's a young player, he was an undrafted free agent, and he's definitely more comfortable in his own skin. I think you can see that, but there were some tough moments in the second half, and the second sack against Max Duggan was not great. I thought that both he and Austin Pleasance had some tough moments. They had some good moments too. There was one rep against Byron Young, I think his name is, number 0 for the Rams, where Foster was able to trap him and get him to the ground, and we hadn't really seen him do that. So there was definitely some growth, but I thought both of the tackles had some tough moments as well.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I hate to bring that up, but there's tackle depth too. We got to talk about.
You got to talk about it. You have to,
for sure.
So yeah, that's offensive line talk. Satisfying my personal quota, which we always have to get on the show because I'm a big offensive line guy.
Yeah.
Tyler, who did you want to highlight next after Saturday night's performance?
Oh goodness. Anybody on the defensive line, to be completely honest, but let's go with Chris Rumph. I think that, look, I understand, and people even made the comments while this was happening. Chris Rumph has been great in the preseason, maybe kind of shies away and goes away during the regular season. Doesn't quite live up to what the preseason looks like, but there was just a display of stringing either pass rush moves together or just power that Chris Rumph had, that you're really starting to see what looks like a complete pass rusher out there. And I don't know how strong the Rams feel about their tackles. It seems like the whole thing is in flux. But he went out there and looked like their best defender and then just got to sit down. Like, the way he was rushing the passer and the ferocity that he has, he's improved so much. Like, this was a guy at Duke who was, like, playing sort of like Thule, but he was smaller and, like, playing a lot of linebackery stuff and going out in college. The transformation to what he is now, both in body type, play style, and even just where he plays, is tremendous. Like, Brandon Staley has really taken this player, given him enough reps. Now sometimes he just had to because of injuries, but they really built this player, Chris Rumph, to improve. And I think that while it was very limited action, there was so much to like about what he could do. And then you pivot to the 20-year-old in Thule, and this is really, I guess, both of them together. It's the best edge 3, edge 4 situation they've had in the Telesco era, and I almost think that's by far. I could argue they've had maybe a better edge 3, that being Uchenna and Nwosu at the time. But they haven't had an edge 4, like whether it's Chris Rumph or it's Thule. They have not had a situation like this in quite some time. I went and looked back at the Chiefs game in 2020 and Herbert's debut, and that trio, Ingram, Bosa, and Nwosu, had 19 pressures, a sack, multiple run stops, etc.
I remember that
They
game.
could do
It was
whatever.
great.
And it allowed like Jerry Tillery to have 6 pressures and a sack or whatever he ended up having that game. You know, we've talked about Morgan Fox as another step forward breakout candidate. The defensive line is coached by Jade Rogers, and that group looks awesome. You've got Bosa, you've got Mack, now you've got Thule, now you've got Chris Rumph looking even better. It's just tough to not get excited for this rotation. And I think that edge 3 and edge 4, both those guys, in like the 12 snaps they had or whatever it was, it's all I needed to see. They looked great.
Yeah, I'm glad you decided to go with Chris Rumph here because, like, I understand last year he had some really good moments in the preseason, but for me, like, looking back at that, it was a lot of just, like, sheer effort and get off because he does have a great get off and he has a ridiculously high motor, but his arsenal has really come a long way and his power has come a long way. That was something that Derek Ansley talked about today, that you know, he didn't put on a ton of weight, I don't think, but like he's definitely stronger. And you see that explosiveness on display when from his sack. You know, he did a long arm stab on this backup offensive tackle, and the tackle like had to jump back. Like you visibly see him move this offensive tackle off of his spot, and then he had a great finish on the quarterback. We just didn't see that kind of stuff last year. And yeah, it's a preseason game, but again, like progress is progress. You see that display of violence and physicality that we hadn't really seen much of. His pressure, where him and Eamon Ogbongbemiga, who I wanted to talk about as well today as well, Chris Rumph had a cross chop move, which I had never seen him do, and he was able to flatten and bend and get to the quarterback and was like inches away from getting a strip sack on Brett Ripien. So yeah, like he played well in the preseason last year, but like you really see some big strides from him just in terms of his physicality, in terms of his technicality as well. And I think we've seen that in practice too. So it's not like this was just a one-off performance where, yeah, like maybe he just like beat somebody to the spot and maybe he just chased somebody down. Like he's actually showing that he's a legitimate pass rush option now. And, you know, there's been a lot of talk about like Thule being like clear edge 3. Chris Rumph might have something to say about it, man. And I think both of these guys are ultimately going to end up playing some big roles for this team.
Yeah, I didn't expect the newfound power that Chris has had. Because that's kind of what I felt like with Thule. Although Thule says he's more of a technician than a power guy, which I thought was interesting. Which, hey, great, I'm cool with that because he's really powerful. So if he also wants to be a technician, that's great. But I didn't really expect Chris to then continue with that and get that strength that, you know, maybe he hasn't really had, really more in particular against the run. So if he can do that, yeah, I think it's really an edge 3 A-B situation more than a 3 and a 4 here. And we've talked about how Chris is so vital to this pass rush and has been on stunts and how successful they were. I don't see any reason to take him off the field.
Yeah, it's pretty reminiscent to the receiver situation right now with Palmer and Quentin Johnston. So I'm really excited to see this come to fruition. You know, like the pass rush depth last year was such an issue, and we got to see Brandon Staley really crank up that blitz rate. This year, he might not have to do that, you know, and it's going to be very interesting to see the ramifications there. I mentioned Eamon. I wanted to highlight him because I thought that he played a fantastic game as well. He wore the green dot for I believe the whole first half, so he was calling plays, communicating, and just felt so much more comfortable back there as he was able to sift through traffic and diagnose plays. There was, you know, that play at the goal line that I tweeted out. It was kind of about JT Woods, but it was also about Eamon Ogbongbemiga, the play after the unsportsmanlike conduct penalty, where at that point the Rams are at the 2.5 yard line, 2 yard line on first down, and so you really have to like set the tone on that first down and play in a goal to go situation. And Eamon was able to shed the block of the guard and come out and be able to get the running back down, and then JT Woods came up and clean up the rest of the play, which speaks highly of what JT Woods and his development too. But Eamon was the one who started that. Eamon, I mentioned his pressure against where Chris Rumph almost got the strip sack. Eamon was up against a running back and just blew this running back off of his feet. Like, it was a great bull rush that we saw. There was another play where Eamon was kind of over the left guard, like behind the left guard to start, and the Rams motioned to the right, so he ended up kind of flowing to the opposite side, and then he cut back underneath and got a tackle for loss. Like, it was a great play from Eamon, and I think that, you know, there's been a lot of rush to see what this linebacker unit can look like. And I think Amon has been incredibly consistent throughout training camp. And on Saturday night, he just looked calm, collected, very similar to like how we felt about Easton Stick's performance. And then he was able to take shots, shoot gaps, get tackles for loss. His average depth of tackle on Saturday night was 2 yards, which is a really, really good number. And I think you feel great about this linebacker depth if Amon can really be a consistent and reliable force if he needs to step in for Eric Kendricks. And I think he's on track to do that. I want to see some more steps, but I thought that he was one of the best players on defense. If not Chris Rumph, I think Amon would probably be my choice there.
Yeah, this is a sneaky story, I guess, to follow throughout the season. Not Amon necessarily, but just what is both being in Brandon Staley's system for many years now, but also the effect of Eric Kendricks and the effect of Jeff Howard having on these linebackers, because we've seen it from Kenneth Murray, of course, in his development and getting closer to the line of scrimmage, making plays behind the line of scrimmage. But you have someone like Amon Ogbongbemiga now who, okay, it's one preseason game. I totally get that, but he was affecting at the line of scrimmage. 2 pressures, I think 4 tackles, 2 run stops or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. He is making plays closer to the line of scrimmage. It just seems like whoever you want to give credit to, him, even Derek Ansley for communication, Jeff Howard, Staley, things are just moving slower for these linebackers, and they're diagnosing so much better. And I think maybe that's also partially just due to the defensive line playing so well. Like Jay Rogers just unleashing anybody you can find. They're getting plays. But these linebackers are looking so good, and Amon is starting to be one of those guys. A player that had potential, undrafted free agent, but they did draft Nick Niemann. And I always kind of wondered, why are you not playing more of Nick Niemann? Maybe I still kind of wonder that. But there's some way that Amon can play where he is a guy who can affect near the line of scrimmage, who can rush the passer. But there was never really like that diagnosing that was going on in the same way like it was on Saturday. So I'm glad you pointed him out. I think it's so quick to look at the guys on the other side of him, right? The 2 starters in front of him or Deion Henley behind him, who's currently not starting or playing in the next group over him. It's easy to overlook Amon, but he's been good, and they have a lot of faith in him.
Yeah, and I think stylistically, like he's probably the closest one they have to Kendricks. There's a lot of space and chase linebackers in the NFL, and there's just kind of that element of physicality that you need to play in the middle as the green dot caller that Eric Kendricks has, and I think that Amon has as well. All right, Tyler, your final takeaway maybe from a player performance. Who do you want to highlight last?
He won't be my game ball because he already got one. I do want to talk about CJ Okoye real quick.
Yeah.
Because, I was talking to Emily Wirtz, who covers the NFL internationally and works with the international players and player relations. She's known him for a while. And they met at NFL Africa camp in Ghana last year, and he was playing offensive line. He's like, hey, I don't like getting hit. I want to hit people. That's what I would like to do. So he switches to defense, and Osi Umenyiora, identifies him. He attends the International Player Pathway Combine or whatever it was, gets to join the Chargers, plays in the first organized football game of his career, and gets a sack. And it was the first time he ever played football or in organized fashion like this in a game. And he gets a sack. And it's kind of, an assist sack. I think it would have gone to, I believe, Gerard Clark if he could have finished that play. But Okoye got a sack, man. And that is one of the coolest stories. And the sideline just went ballistic. Brandon Staley gave him the game ball. One of the best stories of the year. Could be almost a movie at this point. It was awesome to see. It was one play. I think it's the only play he even showed up in the stat sheet. But it's one of the coolest plays I've seen because what a story.
Yeah, the scale of difficulty of that sack I think should not go unnoticed either, because it was a stunt play and he looped all the way around to the other side. He basically came off of the left side, and Gerard Clark certainly kind of started the play, but he had to chase down Stetson Bennett, and Stetson Bennett is a fast quarterback. Like it's not like he chased down Davis Mills or one of these others, Jared Goff, or guys who are a little bit on the slower side. Like Stetson Bennett's a pretty above average athlete at the position. We saw him light up college football with his legs, and so the scale of difficulty should not go unnoticed there. I thought it was a great play overall. and just like the moment of seeing the team come together, the celebration on the sideline, like every player on the team like went over and said something to him. And felt like there was clips of Quentin Johnson going up to him. There's clips of other guys going up to him on the offensive side of the ball. It just was such a cool moment. And then obviously the game ball after the game. Today he's getting love on Good Morning Football. Obviously Chris Harry did a feature on him for CBS leading up to the game. It's just like I think what the NFL is all about. And a lot of times we see these international pathways guys come in, and it's just kind of it's just a struggle for them, making that kind of jump. And not to say that it hasn't been for CJ, but to have this kind of moment, it was truly incredible. And I think, there's some really intriguing physical traits here. Like the guy is 6'7", he's massive, like he's a big dude, and so we'll see what happens there. But he got to have his moment in his first NFL game. Like I think that's another thing too. Like, this was his first organized football game. This isn't some guy who had been playing in Germany for like 4 years or something like that. Like this was his first real football game playing and getting a sack, which is just, such a rarity. And it was like I said, it was a great moment to see.
Yeah, I can't wait to see where it goes from here. I don't recall exactly how it works roster-wise, but I mean, you get to learn from Jay Rodgers and some very, very good players. You talk about Morgan Fox being a mentor for a long, long time, for whether it's just the year or however long it is. It's an awesome story. It was really, really cool to see that. And the sideline celebrations were everything.
Yeah. Great call there to celebrate CJ. All right, Tyler, who is your game ball going to be? I'm very curious to see where you end up going with this decision here.
So just to clarify, are we doing offense and defense or just one game ball?
Let's just do one for today.
Okay. Then I will go with Darius Davis, who we have not mentioned really, I don't think so, so far. And I actually want to talk about, I believe it was the 2-minute drill where he caught a short pass and blew past the defender, turned the corner and got a first down in that 2-minute drill. That was awesome. But okay, the play of the day was the punt return for a touchdown. And boy, he is about as confident as anybody could look, returning his first real punt in the NFL and just going for a touchdown. I couldn't believe that he just started to jog after he caught the ball. It looked very he was very like Jon Snow, at the battle of the word I can't say on this show, drawing the sword and just ready to charge. He was just very confident. He's like, I'm doing this. And then boom, he takes off and goes for a touchdown. Like, there is just something different. I saw day one in practice, no pads. Some guys just are faster than others. And Darius Davis is really fast. And rarely do I get to see and do the math in my head where I can see about where he is relative to the other players and go, oh yeah, he's gone. And he's got 40 yards left, but he's gone because he's that fast. And he was. It was awesome to see. I'll give him a game ball for contributing both on offense and then really just finally showing why they drafted him, because it's been a long time coming. We've had to be really patient through the offseason with Darius Davis because he's been like wide receiver maybe 8 in terms of like production on the team. Some guys like Bynum, Doss, obviously Hightower, more productive than him. But you drafted him for really one reason, and that was to be a returner. And lo and behold, touchdown. And if that's what we're getting this season, to go with the run game we just talked about, and the development of the quarterback and the offensive coordinator, I mean, come on, man. It's good stuff.
It is. It is great stuff. I'm glad you brought up the key conversion too. It's just the speed level is really, really exciting there. I'm excited to see how that continues to develop. I forget which account it was, but I think it was 21.8 miles per hour officially on the punt return. And for that to be for him jogging is pretty crazy. Would love to see what full speed looks like there sometime soon, Mr. Darius Davis.
Yeah. All right, who's your game ball for the game?
All right, so we talked about a lot of guys today. I mentioned how I thought Zach Bailey played. I think that could be a choice here, but I do want to give this game ball to Andrew Farmer, the pass rusher. I thought that he was really a pleasant surprise for me. We've seen a couple moments here and there, but not a ton of reps, and so for him to come into this game and have the 3 pressures, get the sack, get a run stop, get a tackle for loss. And it's not just like he had some splash plays. Tyler, his pass rush win rate on PFF was 25%. which is like number 10th in the league in terms of edge rushers who had at least 10 pass rush snaps in week 1 of the preseason. So he was highly effective on a down-to-down basis. He had the splash plays. This is another guy who has really come a long way out of an HBCU. The Chargers spotted him at the HBCU Combine, and that's an area where the NFL, I think, could do a really better job of finding talent. And they took a chance on Andrew Farmer as an undrafted free agent, and he played incredibly well in his first game in the NFL too. So want to give a shout out to Andrew Farmer and give him the game ball tonight.
That's awesome. I don't recall there being any discussion about Andrew Farmer really prior to training camp and really throughout a lot of it. And understandably so. Nobody had any film on him. We were very lucky to get the games that we did. And you could just see that maybe like he wasn't, obviously, he was undrafted, right? And there's kind of a reason for it. Part of it is also competition that he faces. But you could see there was something there, whether it's you loved him more as a pass rusher, I liked him more as a run defender. He did both, so good for him. He looks really, really good. The motor looked great. Will he make the team? I don't think so, because I think they're just going to stick with 4, and it almost wouldn't have mattered what anybody else did. But Andrew Farmer, HBCU player, rarely discussed player, if at all. For him to go out in his debut and look that good is awesome. And you could have gone with several different edge rushers or defensive linemen, but if I didn't go with Darius Davis, I would have gone with Andrew Farmer. So we're right on the same page with that one.
There we go. All right. To wrap up this conversation today, during the season, we'll have a bit more of a balance between like what happened previously and looking ahead to the game. So we'll briefly talk about the preseason game that's coming up against the Saints. Obviously, they have joint practices. So with the Saints, I'm excited to see what Matt and Chris's takeaways are from being up there up close and personal on Thursday morning. But Tyler, what's one thing, maybe lingering question, or one thing that you want settled after the Saints game?
Slightly depends on participation, but is John Hightower taking that next step? Is that for real? I believe he returned to practice today, did not practice fully all the way through. So we'll see how things go. But I would imagine if he's getting close and knowing he's only got one more game after that, I would imagine he's trying to get out there. And I really want to see if what we've been seeing in practice translates. He's got the quarterback to do it now, so we feel really good about that. Can John Hightower go in and be the guy to push and secure almost that wide receiver 6 spot that is sort of vacant right now because of Jalen Guyton's injury? So I would love to see what he can do in some legit action, because we haven't really seen that just yet.
Yeah, Hightower's a great call. This is kind of turning into more of a battle than I think people are letting on, because Keelan Doss has really kind of been a pretty steady presence for Easton Stick and that second unit. Had some great catches on Saturday night as well. So how does that position battle kind of come to fruition is certainly a key point for the next 2 weeks. You and I have talked about previously, the Chargers really like to keep 10 defensive backs, whether that's 6 corners, 4 safeties, 5 corners, 5 safeties. I think they can be flexible with that. But right now, that 10th spot is really up for grabs, I think. We've seen Mark Webb come on recently. He started in the preseason game. Obviously, we know Raheem Lane is a great special teams player, just brings kind of a different element of physicality. But Cam Brown had himself a really solid performance on Saturday night, too, and he got to go up against some starting caliber receivers. Puka Nacua is going to play a key role for the Rams. So he forced 2 incompletions on Saturday night. He only allowed 19 total yards as a cornerback on 6 targets. So he had a really solid day. So this 10th spot, I think, is really up for grabs. Tywan Mullen was having himself a really good day, I felt like, as well, before the injury, which I think is not super serious, but we haven't got an update there. Mm-hmm. So that 10th defensive back spot, like if Cam Brown really starts to build some momentum, maybe he kind of makes himself essential. Maybe Mark Webb is able to really put it together, get a turnover next week. So that 10th defensive back spot, I think, is a key point to focus on next week and the next week after that as well. Yeah,
that's a great call. I didn't consider Cam Brown. There's a point of the roster where you start like, okay, who's that guy again? But he was making his presence really known, and against the pass, but also like tackling. And I think that's something. I think he ended up with 3 or 4 tackles and a run stop or something. was really strong there. So I'd love to see his development. I feel like if you had to pick then, is it redundant to have Mark Webb also on the roster with Raheem Lane? Maybe. But they love him. Yeah, that's a good call. I didn't even consider the 10th DB spot there. And, could be a good one.
I think with maybe potentially wanting more bodies to play the slot this year, I think that might be a way for Mark Webb and Raheem Lane to both earn a spot this year. Lane's definitely more established on special teams. I feel like at this point, Lane's, I believe, a starter on 3 of the 4 core special teams units. So Ryan Ficken really values his performance there. I don't believe Mark Webb is I think he's a starter on punt return. I'm not sure what else, but so that's obviously a key battle there. And then, like I said, maybe Cam Brown forces his way in there, Tywone Mullen. So we'll see how it goes on that end. So, Tyler, any final thoughts before we head out tonight and get out of here?
Hoping for another win, man. And hopefully everyone gets through practice okay, healthy, safe, and all that. Hopefully nobody starts any fights. Can't think of anyone in particular who would do that. Hopefully everything goes well.
Yes. Very excited to see the content come out of the joint practices. Obviously not a lot of starters playing the preseason. So, we'll get to see Rashawn Slater versus Cameron Jordan in practice. We'll get to see, Asante and JC go up against Chris Olave and Michael Davis, of course, and Michael Thomas. And so just going to be a great couple practices. I hope, we get to see some really cool moments there. But, excited to see how this next preseason game turns out as well. A special thanks to Greg Kim for producing tonight's episode. Can't thank the Chargers enough for continuing to give us this platform. Hopefully all of you guys have enjoyed this episode. Please do us a favor and leave us a rating on this platform if you mind to take the couple moments there and subscribe to this channel as well as our own, the Guilty as Charged podcast. That's going to do it for us tonight. We'll see you guys next time. And as always, bolt up.